the small, quiet town of Willow Creek, life moved at a gentle pace. The air smelled of fresh earth and wildflowers, and the only sounds you'd hear were birds chirping or cows mooing in the distance. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved as they passed by and everyone knew each other's names. For Sarah Thompson, this little corner of the world wasn't just home. It was her sanctuary. Sarah lived on a sprawling farm that had been in her family for generations. Her grandparents built the original farmhouse with their own hands, and her parents added on to it over the years. Every inch of the land told a story. The apple orchard where her father taught her how to climb trees, the creek where she caught tadpoles as a child, and the fields where she spent countless hours planting and harvesting alongside her mother. To Sarah, the farm wasn't just property, it was a piece of her heart. Her days followed a predictable rhythm. She woke up before sunrise to tend to the animals, chickens clucking in their coop, goats bleating for breakfast, and horses nickering softly when they saw her approach. After feeding them, she'd head out to check on the crops. Corn stalks swayed gently in the breeze while rows of tomatoes ripened under the warm sun. There was always work to be done, but Sarah never minded. She loved the feeling of dirt beneath her fingernails and the satisfaction of watching something grow from seed to harvest. The farm also gave Sarah a sense of peace she couldn't find anywhere else. When the stress of life got to be too much, she'd sit on the porch swing and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sometimes, she'd grab a book and read under the shade of an old oak tree, its branches stretching wide, like open arms. Life here was simple, honest, and beautiful, but all of that changed one summer when developers started moving into Willow Creek. At first, it seemed harmless enough. A new housing development here, a shopping center there. But soon, the once quiet roads became busier, and unfamiliar faces began appearing in town. Suburban sprawl crept closer and closer to Sarah's farm, bringing noise, traffic, and change. While some residents welcomed the growth, seeing it as progress, Sarah felt uneasy. She worried about what would happen to the land she loved so dearly. That's when Karen Wilson entered the picture. Karen was the chairwoman of the local homeowners association, HOA, a role she took very seriously, and, sometimes too far, she was known around town for her strict enforcement of rules. Whether it was making sure lawns were mowed to a certain height, or sending angry letters to people who parked their cars in front of someone else's house. Some folks found her dedication admirable. Others thought she was downright annoying. Either way, no one could deny that Karen always got what she wanted. Karen had big plans for Willow Creek. She dreamed of turning the sleepy town into a bustling tourist destination, complete with luxury resorts, golf courses, and high-end restaurants. And when she set her sights on Sarah's farm, she saw endless possibilities. The rolling hills, the sparkling creek, and the lush greenery made it the perfect spot for her vision of paradise. All she needed was Sarah's cooperation. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah answered a knock at her door to find Karen standing there, clipboard in hand, and a confident smile plastered across her face. "Good morning, Sarah," Karen said brightly, though her tone carried an edge of authority. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not really," Sarah replied cautiously, stepping aside to let her in. "What can I do for you?" "Well," Karen began, flipping through papers on her clipboard, "as you may know, Willow Creek is undergoing some exciting changes. We're working hard to bring new opportunities to the area, and your farm is uniquely positioned to play a key role in that transformation." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "My farm? What do you mean?" Karen gestured dramatically toward the window, as if unveiling a grand masterpiece. "Imagine this place turned into a 5-star resort. Luxury cabins nestled among the trees, a spa overlooking the creek, fine dining restaurants serving locally, sourced ingredients. It would put Willow Creek on the map." Sarah blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. "That sounds interesting," she said carefully, "but I don't think I'm interested in selling." Karen's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, come now, Sarah. Think about the potential. You'd make a fortune and you'd be doing something great for the community. Besides, isn't it time to let go of the past and embrace the future?" For Sarah, those words stung. Let go of the past? The farm wasn't just a relic of the past, it was her present and her future. It was where she belonged, where she felt alive. Selling it was unthinkable. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Karen," Sarah said firmly, "but this farm means everything to me. I'm not selling." Karen's expression hardened. Clearly, she wasn't used to being told no. "Well, I suppose we'll have to discuss this further," she said curtly, snapping her clipboard shut. "But mark my words, Sarah, progress waits for no one." As Karen walked away, Sarah couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her gut. Something about Karen's determination worried her. This wasn't just a casual suggestion, it was a demand wrapped in a thin layer of politeness. And Sarah had a sinking suspicion that this wouldn't be the last time she heard from Karen Wilson. Little did she know Karen wasn't about to give up easily. In fact, she was already plotting her next move, determined to get what she wanted, no matter the cost. The days following Karen Wilson's visit were anything but peaceful for Sarah Thompson. At first, Sarah tried to brush off the encounter as just another odd moment in her otherwise quiet life. But it didn't take long for her to realize that Karen wasn't going to let the matter drop. In fact, Karen seemed determined to wear Sarah down no matter how long it took. It started with letters. Official-looking envelopes began arriving in Sarah's mailbox almost daily. Each one contained a neatly typed message from Karen, outlining why selling the farm was the right decision. The letters were polite on the surface, but beneath the formal tone, there was an unmistakable sense of pressure. "Think about the benefits to the community," one letter read. "Your land could create jobs and bring prosperity to Willow Creek." Another warned vaguely about potential complications if Sarah continued to resist. At first, Sarah ignored them. She tossed the letters into a drawer without giving them much thought, assuming that Karen would eventually lose interest. But Karen wasn't the type to give up easily. When the letters didn't work, she moved on to emails. Her messages grew longer and more frequent, filling Sarah's inbox with arguments about progress, economic growth, and the inevitability of change. Some emails even included glossy brochures showcasing luxury resorts in other parts of the country, as if to tempt Sarah with visions of wealth and glamour. Still, Sarah refused to engage. She deleted the emails without reading them fully, focusing instead on her daily chores. There were crops to tend, animals to feed, and fences to mend. Life on the farm kept her busy, and she preferred it that way. The less she thought about Karen and her relentless campaign, the better. But Karen wasn't done yet. One afternoon, as Sarah was stacking firewood near the barn, her phone rang. It was Karen. "Sarah," she said in a voice that was equal parts friendly and firm, "I've been trying to reach you. We really need to talk about your options." "I don't have any options," Sarah replied curtly. "I'm not selling my farm." Karen sighed dramatically as if she were dealing with a stubborn child. "You're being short-sighted, Sarah. Do you realize how much money you're leaving on the table? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "It's not about the money," Sarah shot back. "This farm has been in my family for generations. It's not for sale." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Karen spoke again, her tone had shifted. Gone was the cheerful persuasion. In its place was something colder, sharper. "You might want to reconsider," she said. "If you refuse to cooperate, we may have no choice but to explore alternative solutions." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What did Karen mean by alternative solutions? Was she threatening her? Before she could ask, Karen ended the call abruptly, leaving Sarah standing there with the phone still pressed to her ear. Things only escalated from there. A few days later, Sarah noticed a group of people gathered near her property line. They were holding signs that read things like "Progress over preservation" and "Support economic growth." Some of them shouted slogans through megaphones, their voices echoing across the fields. Sarah recognized a few faces, neighbors she'd known for years, but most of them were strangers, brought in by Karen to make her case look stronger. Sarah approached the group. She saw Karen standing at the center, barking orders into a walkie-talkie. When she spotted Sarah, she plastered on a fake smile and marched over. "Ah, Sarah!" she exclaimed. as though they were old friends catching up. I'm so glad you're here. These wonderful people are rallying to support the development of your farm. Isn't it exciting? Exciting? Sarah repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. You're trespassing on my land, Karen, and these people don't even live here. Why are you doing this? Karen's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. We're simply raising awareness, Sarah. People need to understand what's at stake. Your refusal to sell isn't just affecting you, it's holding back the entire community. That's ridiculous, Sarah snapped. My farm has nothing to do with anyone else. I'm not stopping progress. I'm protecting my home. Karen's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of anger behind her polished exterior. Fine, Karen said coldly. If you won't listen to reason, maybe the law will. From that point on, Karen's tactics became even more aggressive. She began citing obscure zoning laws and environmental regulations, claiming that Sarah's farm was in violation of rules she had never heard of before. Inspectors started showing up unannounced, poking around the property and asking intrusive questions. One day, Sarah found a notice taped to her front door, accusing her of improper waste management and demanding immediate action. The stress was overwhelming. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she was losing control of her own home. Every knock on the door made her heart race. Every letter in the mailbox filled her with dread. She spent hours poring over documents, trying to prove that her farm was compliant with all local laws. But no matter how many times she disproved Karen's claims, new accusations kept coming. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of dealing with inspectors, Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a stack of papers. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. Giving in wasn't an option. Not to Karen, not to anyone. But she couldn't keep fighting this battle alone. That's when she remembered Mr. Henderson, an elderly lawyer, who lived a few miles down the road. He had helped her parents draft their wills years ago, and always seemed to know exactly what to say when things got complicated. Maybe he could help her navigate this mess. The next morning, Sarah drove to Mr. Henderson's house. His office was small but cozy, filled with shelves of dusty law books and framed photos of his grandchildren. When she explained the situation, he listened intently, nodding occasionally but saying little until she finished. This sounds serious, he said finally, adjusting his glasses. But don't worry, Sarah. We'll figure this out together. Over the next few days, Mr. Henderson dug into the legal history of Sarah's farm. To her immense relief, he discovered something that gave her hope. The property was protected under century-old agricultural easements. These agreements, put in place by her ancestors, ensured that the land could only be used for farming purposes. Unless Sarah herself agreed to lift the restrictions, no one, not even Karen, could rezone or develop the property. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah felt a renewed sense of confidence. She wasn't just fighting for her farm, she was defending a legacy that had stood the test of time. But as she prepared to face Karen again, she couldn't shake the feeling that this conflict was far from over. Karen was relentless, cunning, and willing to do whatever it took to get what she wanted. And Sarah knew that standing her ground wouldn't be easy. But it was the only choice she had. For now, the farm was safe. But Sarah also understood that Karen wouldn't stop until she either succeeded or was forced to admit defeat. As the sun set over the fields, casting long shadows across the land, Sarah vowed to protect her home no matter what challenges lay ahead. With the discovery of the agricultural easements, Sarah finally had a solid foundation to stand on. For the first time since Karen Wilson entered her life, she felt like she wasn't fighting blindly anymore. The legal protection meant that Karen couldn't simply bulldoze her way through and take over the farm, not without Sarah's explicit consent. It was a powerful tool, but Sarah knew it wouldn't be enough to stop someone as determined as Karen. She needed a strategy, one that would not only protect her land, but also expose Karen's true intentions. Sarah began by meeting with Mr. Henderson again, this time to map out their next steps. Together they drafted letters to local authorities, clarifying the status of the farm under the agricultural easements. They sent copies of these documents to Karen, making sure she understood just how legally untouchable the property was. Sarah hoped that seeing the evidence in black and white would make Karen back off, but deep down, she doubted it would be that simple. Karen, however, didn't react the way Sarah expected. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. Within days, Sarah noticed more activity around the edges of her property. Surveyors appeared, marking boundaries with bright orange flags. Heavy machinery rumbled along nearby roads, and workers began clearing brush from adjacent lots. When Sarah confronted Karen about it, she shrugged it off with a smirk. "Oh, don't worry," Karen said breezily. "This isn't your land, it's the neighbors. We're just getting started." It didn't take long for Sarah to realize what was happening. Karen wasn't giving up on her dream of turning the area into a luxury resort. She was working around Sarah's protected land instead. By purchasing neighboring properties, Karen was slowly piecing together a patchwork of land that surrounded the farm. If Sarah refused to sell, Karen could still build her resort right up to the edges of the farm, effectively boxing it in. And worse, the constant noise, traffic, and construction would disrupt the peaceful life Sarah had always cherished. Furious but determined, Sarah decided to dig deeper. She spent hours at the county clerk's office, poring over property records and tax filings. What she uncovered shocked her. Karen wasn't just buying up land, she was doing so under multiple shell companies. These anonymous entities made it nearly impossible to trace ownership back to her directly. It was a clever move, designed to shield Karen from scrutiny while she quietly amassed control over the surrounding area. But Sarah wasn't about to let Karen get away with it. With Mr. Henderson's guidance, she filed formal complaints against the shell companies, alleging improper land use and violations of zoning laws. She also reached out to her neighbors, urging them to join her fight. At first, many were hesitant. Some had already sold their properties to Karen's associates, lured by promises of quick cash. Others were afraid of retaliation if they spoke out. But Sarah persisted, sharing the documents she'd gathered and explaining how Karen's actions threatened everyone's quality of life. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to gain allies. A few retired farmers who remembered the days before suburban sprawl rallied behind her, horrified at the thought of losing Willow Creek's rural charm. Even some younger residents, initially swayed by Karen's talk of economic growth, started questioning her motives when they saw the scale of destruction unfolding around them. Bulldozers tore through forests, displacing wildlife and sending clouds of dust billowing into the air. Streams ran murky with silt from unchecked erosion. The idyllic landscape that had drawn people to Willow Creek in the first place was disappearing fast. As public opinion shifted, Karen grew increasingly desperate. Her once friendly demeanor turned icy, and her tactics became even more aggressive. She accused Sarah of spreading misinformation, going so far as to hold a town hall meeting, where she claimed Sarah was holding the community hostage. "She's selfishly clinging to her outdated way of life," Karen declared, pacing the stage like a politician campaigning for votes. "While the rest of us are trying to bring jobs and prosperity to Willow Creek, she's standing in the way," the crowd murmured uneasily. While some attendees nodded in agreement, others exchanged skeptical glances. Sarah sat in the back listening intently. When Karen opened the floor for questions, Sarah stood up, clutching a folder filled with evidence. Calmly and confidently, she addressed the room. "I'm not against progress," she began, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "But real progress doesn't come at the expense of our values or our environment. Look at what's happening to this town. Trees are being cut down, animals are losing their habitats, and our water sources are being polluted, all because one person wants to line her own pockets." She held up copies of the property records linking Karen to the shell companies. And let's not forget who's really behind all this. Karen talks about community and prosperity, but her actions tell a different story. This isn't about helping Willow Creek. It's about helping herself. The room fell silent. Some people looked angry, others stunned. Karen tried to interrupt, stammering denials and accusations, but her usual confidence seemed to falter under the weight of Sarah's words. By the end of the meeting, several attendees approached Sarah, offering their support. One couple even admitted they regretted selling their land to one of Karen's companies after realizing how misleading her promises had been. Despite this small victory, Sarah knew the battle was far from over. Karen still controlled a significant amount of land, and construction continued at a rapid pace. Every day brought new challenges: blocked driveways, mysterious power outages, and even threats scrawled on signs near her property. Yet Sarah refused to give in. Each obstacle only strengthened her resolve. One evening, as she walked the perimeter of her farm, Sarah paused to watch the sunset. The sky blazed with hues of gold and crimson, casting a warm glow over the fields. Despite everything, moments like this reminded her why she was fighting so hard. This land wasn't just dirt and crops, it was a living, breathing part of her soul, and no amount of intimidation or manipulation would ever change that. As she stood there, an idea began to form in her mind. Up until now, she'd been playing defense, reacting to Karen's moves and scrambling to protect what was hers. But maybe it was time to switch strategies. Maybe it was time to go on the offensive. With renewed determination, Sarah returned to the house and called Mr. Henderson. "We need to set a trap," she said firmly. "Something that will expose Karen for who she really is and put an end to this once and for all." Mr. Henderson chuckled softly. "You've got guts, Sarah. I'll give you that. Let's hear your plan." Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Mr. Henderson devised a strategy that was equal parts daring and calculated. They would use Karen's greed and ambition against her, drawing her into a situation where her illegal activities would be impossible to hide. It was risky, but Sarah was willing to take the chance. After all, she had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. As the pieces of the plan fell into place, Sarah felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months. The road ahead would be difficult, and Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. But Sarah was ready. She had the law on her side, her community rallying behind her, and a fierce determination to protect the legacy of her family's farm. Whatever came next, she knew she could face it head-on. Sarah's plan was simple in theory but complex in execution. The goal was clear: lure Karen into a position where her illegal activities would be exposed, leaving her with no choice but to retreat or face the consequences. To achieve this, Sarah and Mr. Henderson crafted a carefully orchestrated series of steps that played on Karen's greed and desperation. It was risky, but Sarah knew she had to act decisively if she wanted to protect her farm and her community for good. The first step was spreading a rumor. Sarah didn't do it directly. Instead, she planted seeds of information through trusted allies in Willow Creek. She casually mentioned to a few neighbors that she was considering selling part of her land, but only to someone who shared her vision of preserving its natural beauty. Word traveled fast in a small town, and soon everyone was talking about Sarah's supposed change of heart. Some people were skeptical, knowing how deeply Sarah loved the farm, but others saw it as a sign of progress finally winning out. Karen, of course, heard about it almost immediately. At first, she dismissed it as another one of Sarah's tricks, a ploy to buy time or gain sympathy. But when more details emerged, specifically whispers of eco-friendly developers interested in buying the property, Karen began to panic. If Sarah sold to someone else, especially someone committed to conservation, Karen's dream of a luxury resort would crumble before it even began. Unable to resist the bait, Karen sprang into action. Using her network of shell companies, she submitted competing bids for the land, each one higher than the last. The offers came flooding in, some accompanied by glossy brochures and promises of mutual benefit. But Sarah remained calm, playing the role of the undecided seller perfectly. She thanked the representatives, who were, in reality, Karen's associates, for their interest, but insisted she needed more time to consider her options. Behind the scenes, Sarah and Mr. Henderson worked tirelessly to track every move Karen made. Every document she signed, every transaction she initiated, was meticulously recorded and analyzed. They ensured that each step Karen took violated local regulations, banking laws, or environmental protections. For example, one of the shell companies failed to disclose its connection to Karen, which was required by law. Another attempted to secure permits using forged signatures. Each misstep became another thread in the web they were weaving around her. To make matters worse for Karen, Sarah leaked additional rumors about negotiations with legitimate eco-developers. These weren't just idle whispers. They included fake emails and mock proposals detailing plans for sustainable agriculture projects and wildlife sanctuaries. The documents looked so convincing that even seasoned professionals might have been fooled. Karen, however, fell for them hook, line, and sinker. Convinced that her rival developers were gaining ground, she pushed harder than ever, cutting corners and breaking rules in her haste to secure the deal. Meanwhile, Sarah kept up appearances, meeting with potential buyers and discussing terms over coffee or phone calls. She acted hesitant, expressing concerns about timing, pricing, and long-term commitments. This gave Karen the impression that the sale was still within reach, keeping her hooked. In reality, every conversation Sarah had was being documented, not just for legal purposes but also to build a case against Karen. As the weeks went by, Karen's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She stopped sleeping properly, obsessively, checking her phone for updates from her associates. Her once polished demeanor cracked under the pressure, revealing a woman willing to do anything to win. She bribed officials to expedite permits, falsified environmental impact reports, and even tried to intimidate Sarah's supporters into silence. But no matter what she did, the finish line always seemed just out of reach. One evening, Sarah received a call from Mr. Henderson. His voice was unusually excited. "We've got her," he said. "One of the shell companies just transferred funds from an offshore account to pay for the land. It's textbook money laundering." Sarah felt a surge of triumph mixed with disbelief. After months of fighting, they finally had concrete proof of Karen's wrongdoing. But there was still work to be done. With Mr. Henderson's guidance, Sarah filed formal complaints with state and federal authorities, attaching all the evidence they had gathered. They also reached out to local media outlets, sharing the story of how Karen had manipulated the system and exploited her neighbors for personal gain. The response was immediate. Reporters descended on Willow Creek, eager to uncover the truth behind the scandal. Interviews with Sarah, her supporters, and even former employees of Karen's shell companies painted a damning picture of corruption and greed. Photos of deforested areas, polluted streams, and half-built structures reinforced the narrative that Karen's actions had caused irreparable harm to the community. For Karen, the fallout was swift and brutal. Investors pulled out of her projects, citing ethical concerns. Banks froze her accounts pending investigations. And worst of all, the public turned against her, labeling her a villain who cared more about profit than people. The same neighbors who had once cheered her on now avoided her like the plague, ashamed of having supported her schemes. Despite everything, Karen refused to admit defeat. She held a press conference outside the unfinished resort, flanked by lawyers and PR reps. "This is a witch hunt," she declared, her voice trembling with anger. "I've done nothing wrong. All I wanted was to bring prosperity to Willow Creek." But her words rang hollow. The evidence spoke for itself, and the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. Within days, Karen was forced to flee town, leaving behind a mess of unfinished buildings, unpaid debts, and broken dreams. Back at the farm, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She walked through the fields, breathing in the fresh air and listening to the sounds of nature returning to the area. Birds chirped in the trees, deer grazed near the creek, and wildflowers bloomed along the fence lines. It was as if the land itself was healing after months of turmoil. Though the battle had been exhausting, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not only had she protected her family's legacy, but she had also stood up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. As she gazed out over the rolling hills, she knew the fight wasn't entirely over. There would always be challenges, always be people like Karen who sought to exploit the weak for their own gain. But for now, Sarah could rest easy, knowing that her home and her community were safe. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah smiled. She had won not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in the value of honesty, hard work, and the simple joys of rural life. Karen Wilson was many things, ambitious, cunning, and relentless, but above all, she hated to lose. And as the walls closed in around her, she became more determined than ever to see her vision through. To Karen, failure wasn't just an outcome, it was a personal affront. She had staked everything on transforming Willow Creek into her dream resort destination, and now, with Sarah Thompson seemingly considering selling her land to eco-friendly developers, Karen felt cornered. But being cornered didn't mean giving up, it meant doubling down. If Sarah wouldn't sell directly to her, then Karen would find another way. Using her network of shell companies, she began secretly acquiring even more parcels of land surrounding the farm. Each purchase pushed her closer to her goal, boxing Sarah's property in so tightly that it would become worthless unless she sold. The strategy was risky, but Karen believed it was worth it. After all, what choice did Sarah have? Surrounded by construction, noise, and disruption, surely she'd cave. Construction crews worked tirelessly, clearing trees, leveling ground, and laying foundations at a breakneck pace. Bulldozers tore through the landscape, leaving scars where wildflowers once bloomed. Streams were rerouted to make room for artificial ponds designed to look natural in marketing photos. Roads were widened, cutting through fields and forests alike. Day by day, the serene beauty of Willow Creek gave way to the sterile uniformity of development. From her farmhouse, Sarah watched it all unfold with a mix of anger and sadness. The changes weren't just unsightly, they were destructive. Wildlife fled the area, unable to adapt to the sudden loss of habitat. Birds no longer sang in the mornings, replaced instead by the constant hum of machinery. Dust filled the air, coating crops and clogging streams. Even the animals on her farm seemed agitated, sensing the upheaval happening just beyond their pastures. Despite the chaos, Sarah stayed focused. Every illegal move Karen made played right into her hands. With Mr. Henderson's help, she meticulously documented every violation: unauthorized tree removals, improper waste disposal, forged permits, and water diversion practices that violated environmental laws. Each piece of evidence strengthened their case against Karen, but Sarah knew they needed something undeniable, a smoking gun that would bring her schemes crashing down. That's when fate intervened in an unexpected way. One of Karen's hired contractors, frustrated by months of late payments and poor working conditions, reached out to Sarah anonymously. He claimed to have proof of Karen's most egregious offenses: falsified documents, bribes paid to local officials, and plans to bypass safety inspections entirely. In exchange for immunity, he offered to hand over everything he had: emails, invoices, blueprints, and recordings of incriminating conversations. Sarah wasted no time. Working with Mr. Henderson, she arranged a secure meeting with the whistleblower, ensuring his identity remained protected. What he provided was nothing short of explosive. Among the documents was a detailed timeline of Karen's fraudulent activities, showing how she had manipulated zoning laws, exploited loopholes, and funneled money through offshore accounts to fund her projects. There were also drafts of contracts between Karen and her shell companies, clearly outlining their interconnectedness, a fact she had gone to great lengths to hide. Armed with this new evidence, Sarah and Mr. Henderson escalated their legal efforts. They filed formal complaints not only with local authorities, but also with state and federal agencies tasked with investigating corruption and environmental violations. They submitted copies of the whistleblower's documents, along with affidavits, from neighbors who had witnessed the destruction firsthand. Within days, inspectors descended on the construction site, armed with cease and desist orders and subpoenas demanding answers. For Karen, the scrutiny came too late. Construction on the resort was already well underway, though far from complete. Cabins stood half-finished, their skeletal frames jutting awkwardly against the horizon. Swimming pools lay empty, their surfaces cracked and unfinished. Golf courses were little more than patches of dead grass, victims of rushed landscaping attempts. Despite the glaring flaws, Karen refused to halt operations. She ordered workers to keep going, convinced that sheer momentum would carry her through. Her confidence, however, masked a growing sense of panic. Behind closed doors, Karen scrambled to cover her tracks. She shredded documents, deleted emails, and pressured her associates to stay silent. But the tighter she clung to control, the faster things unraveled. Workers began walking off the job, citing unsafe conditions and unpaid wages. Suppliers refused to deliver materials without upfront payment. And when news broke of the ongoing investigations, investors pulled out en masse, leaving Karen scrambling to plug financial gaps. The media frenzy only added fuel to the fire. Reporters swarmed Willow Creek, eager to capture the downfall of Resortgate Karen, as headlines dubbed her. Cameras followed her everywhere, capturing her increasingly frantic attempts to salvage the project. In one particularly humiliating moment, Karen tripped while trying to evade journalists, landing face first in a muddy trench near the construction site. Photos of the incident went viral, earning her ridicule across social media platforms. As public opinion turned decisively against her, Karen's allies dwindled. Neighbors who had once supported her vision distanced themselves, fearing guilt by association. Local businesses that had profited from her spending stopped answering her calls. Even members of the HOA, the very organization she chaired, voted unanimously to remove her from her position, citing ethical concerns. Yet despite the mounting pressure, Karen refused to surrender. She held press conferences, lashing out at critics and accusing Sarah of orchestrating a smear campaign. "This is about jealousy," she shouted during one televised rant. "Sarah can't handle progress, so she's dragging my name through the mud." But her words fell flat. The evidence was overwhelming, and the public had already made up its mind. As the legal battles dragged on, Karen found herself isolated, bankrupt, and utterly defeated. Her dream of a luxury resort had morphed into a nightmare of lawsuits, fines, and public shame. Back at the farm, Sarah allowed herself a small measure of relief. Watching Karen unravel had been both satisfying and sobering. It was clear now that greed and ambition could drive someone to ruin, not just themselves, but everyone around them. Yet Sarah couldn't afford to celebrate just yet. While Karen's empire crumbled, the damage she had inflicted on Willow Creek remained. Trees were gone, streams polluted, and wildlife displaced. Healing the land would take years, if not decades. Still, there was hope. With Karen's projects abandoned, Sarah proposed turning the unfinished resort into a nature preserve. She envisioned trails winding through restored forests, educational programs highlighting sustainable farming practices, and spaces for visitors to reconnect with the natural world. The idea resonated with the community, many of whom had grown weary of the endless sprawl and yearned for a return to simplicity. As Sarah stood on her porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the hills, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight had been long and grueling, but it had taught her something invaluable: resilience. No matter how daunting the odds, standing up for what you believe in could spark change, not just for yourself, but for others too. And though the scars of battle lingered, they served as reminders of what had been saved, and what could still be rebuilt. The road ahead would require patience, hard work, and collaboration. But for the first time in months, Sarah felt optimistic about the future. Willow Creek might never be the same as it was before Karen arrived, but it could heal. And with care and dedication, it could become something even better.